Can I remember where the button is? Yes, I can. Okie dokie then. I was thinking of using the hotkey, but I thought, yeah, no, what? Nah, I'm gonna push the button. So, John, you asked me a question during the week about a conversation you had with a couple of other people, and I figured we'd start with you explaining the conversation so everyone listening has context.
Nah, I don't want to give context. Why would we do that? So yeah, this week, my son, 11 years old, has been talking a lot about all the things he can't do. So he has a really bad memory. He's always forgetting things. He's always distracted. Now he has an official diagnosis of ASD, so it's kind of linked like that.
Hmm.
Because you have this means you behave like that. And so it's becoming a problem because I'm just like, and that's where I started. I went, okay, cool. Let's assume that that is correct. What can you do about it? Well, nothing. Like, exactly. So what is, and he goes, I have a really bad memory. So the first question I asked is, well, what is memory?
You asked an 11-year-old boy what
Yeah,
is
I
memory,
did. He liked, yeah, additional context.
I was going to say,
He liked,
some people are like, oh no, we can't teach children this. That's too complicated. And you go and ask them what memory is. Like,
well, why not? For context, he likes hard questions. He likes to be challenged with different questions. He doesn't like hard questions. He likes being challenged because
hmm.
he's very much like most of the stuff he does in school does not challenge him.
I think that's the same for most children.
Yeah.
And I guess prefacing the conversation that is likely to ensue here. When people talk about educating children, they, for whatever reason, see children as this sort of separate species. Like, children aren't mini adults. Children are different things. You're like, yeah, but then you have a different thing for an 11-year-old boy with all of these potential conditions and diagnoses and labels that we have put on them as societies, plus all of the preconceived notions that they have as a person. Like, that means every single person that you teach inside of a school is individual, which in an ideal world is great. But teachers can't teach 100 individuals every single day. They don't have the bandwidth or the ability to do that, or the resources or the money or anything else, but they don't have that. So they need to categorize people, but categorizing people as, oh, they're small adults or they're children. Like, no, don't dumb them down. They are just people.
Yeah. And so that's something that I do my best as a parent to use and have
Mm.
that like philosophy. So when he asks me those questions, I'm just like, well, why? That assumes you can't do anything. There's so many assumptions that you've made there. Do you want to explore those assumptions? And it's like his reaction, honestly, was okay. Because he knows when because I remember one time and he came to me and went, why do you ask so many questions? And why is there never an easy answer for them? And
Welcome to philosophy.
I replied to that is, why do you think that? And then I laughed and I went, because I'm curious. I find it interesting to talk about questions that don't really have an answer, or they have multiple answers.
Non-linear multi-causality.
Mm.
I'm not going to try and say that 10 times fast.
I did try to cover that, and then I nearly destroyed everyone because they were asking, "Oh, but what about this? And what about that? And what about this? And what about that?" And I'm just like, non-linear causal. What? Oh, you don't want to know. I
I
don't think you're ready for this one.
I actually approach the causality questions with the butterfly effect because it's an effect that the majority of people are, if they're not familiar with, they can
Yeah,
sort of wrap their head around and be like, yeah, but I don't think that's true, or that's not right, or how can that be true, sort of thing. You're like, but that's the point. That the point is that a butterfly flapping its wings cannot cause a tsunami all the way over there, but it could cause something which causes something else, which could cause something else, which could relate to in some way that tsunami over there. We
yeah.
don't know. That's the point. Uh, and that's where I would go with any of those sorts of questions where it's like, oh, yeah, but why do you ask so many questions? Like, because there isn't one answer. There is
Yeah.
more than one answer. Which answer you lean towards is the one you're likely to give, but it doesn't mean that that is the answer. And I'm listening to H Bomber Guy. Well, I listened to H Bomber Guy's plagiarism video at the beginning of the week. For those that haven't seen it, it's about 4 hours long on YouTube. And he talks about plagiarism on YouTube, different examples. And he skips over the misinformation elements of it because he wanted to focus on plagiarism. Totally understandable. And the way that you talk about these sorts of things on YouTube is you have it's funny. I just listened to a short with him giving a response off the record, sort of thing. Uh, you have to add some intrigue, and if it's an academic concept that's not objectified, it's not physics, it's
Yeah.
not math, it's not mechanics, it's not engineering, and it's philosophy. The curiosity gap can't come from the question, because if it comes from the question, then you're just asking a philosophical question that people go, yeah, what? So what? Yeah, okay, whatever. But if you add drama through a person or a face or something that happens in action, people are suddenly interested. And in the H Bomber Guy response, he says that YouTube is a cesspool of drama and it's not good, this, that, and the other. And I'm sitting there thinking, yeah, but if you want to talk about psychology or philosophy or the way that you act, like morals and ethics, you've got to add something in there. Otherwise, people just don't care. And
Mm.
that's why when you ask those questions, people are like, but why are you asking those questions? Like, it's too complicated, it's too difficult. I don't want to think about all that stuff. That's a problem. No one wants to
Yeah.
think about this stuff.
Yeah.
So I'm curious as to obviously I preface that by saying a lot of people want or require a lot of the time a jump in, a reason to go in, and on YouTube that is saying someone that is publicly facing wrong. Like my video about Johnny Harris, he's wrong, and everyone that disliked the video jumped on the fact that I was targeting Johnny Harris, but he was just the case study example. Like the point wasn't to go, Johnny Harris was wrong, everyone's wrong. And the point was to go, he's faulty, everyone's faulty. The point was to say, here's some practices we can do to try and avoid misinformation online. uh, and a lot of the audience understood that, but some didn't. So I'm curious with your son and with anyone else that's asked similar questions, where their entry point was to the questions that we ask ourselves regularly on this podcast.
It was, there has been multiple entry points, because obviously, but the one that recently happened was it was during that conversation about memory. I said, well, I asked what is memory, and then uh, they were a tiny bit like, I don't know, for obvious reasons, because it's a big philosophical question, and they weren't sure. I said, well,
You even saying that, you even saying memory is a philosophical question would get some psychologists like really, really stood up, and a lot of people like, what do you mean? Memory's not philosophical? But your son was open to that.
I think so. He may not have understood half of it. He gave the like it's in your brain. Memory is in your brain. It's stored in the brain, basically.
Yeah,
Um, and
expected.
I'm like, okay. So does that mean you have a limited amount of storage in your brain? And he was like, yeah, that's what. So that's the problem. You don't have enough storage in your brain. So if we add more storage into your brain, will it get better? And then he was saying he started laughing. I said, what? Well, I can't make my brain bigger. Okay, cool.
You can't make your brain bigger. Can you make it denser though?
uh, uh.
And then you have like no room after 50 years of living because
Yeah,
your brain is
yeah. And so and we went carried down that line. I said, okay, cool. So you have a bad memory, yeah? You can't remember things. Okay, Aiden, how do you say hello, my name is Aiden in French? And he recited it like that. What about in German? Like that. Russian, like that. I'm like, okay,
It's a lot of languages.
yes, he loves his languages. So why can you remember all of that if your memory is full? And he was like, huh.
Hmm.
And he sat,
And he-
excuse me, he sat there for a number of minutes just thinking. And we
But
kind of
so where
continued.
did he get?
He didn't know.
That's fair.
And I was like, do you want to know what I think? And he was like, yeah. And so I kind of, as lightly as possible, which probably wasn't very lightly, introduced the idea about how memory is not in here, or I originally said it's not in here, and then later on, because I heard everyone going, yeah, but does that mean the brain isn't part of it? I'm like, it is, but we're focusing too much on the brain. Like our focus is so much on the brain versus the environment that we're in. Then I introduced environment, and then my friend went, so you mean like, and it's the common misconception of the environment being the physical location. It's like not just the physical environment, but the social environment, the mental environment, like all of these environments, not just the physical one. Oh, okay.
I
And
I have a tendency to add ecological in front of a lot of those words, so
I
that
know, but
I'm,
that's the problem. The
I'm
moment
like
I introduce
ecological environment.
ecological, it's like so fish. And then I have to explain what ecological is. That's the hard part, is like trying to explain that on top of already all of the things I've already introduced at one go to three different people at three different levels of understanding.
Three, your son and your daughter, or
Son, daughter, and friend. Yeah, all three of
right?
us in the room at the same time.
Look at you doing a bit of lecturing.
Ada did say, he was there like, this feels like a course qualification. No, no, this is probably closer to a master's, I think.
You you could do an undergrad, but I think it would be embedded within a course because not enough people would take it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's probably the
It's
people I've
definitely
spoken,
degree.
it's definitely a degree.
I mean, the fact that so this is something that I'm looking. This is insider information. I'm doing a video about ecological psychology and the ecological approach. I've been planning it out for a while, but I don't know how to, or I didn't know how to market it or plan it or do anything like that. Um, and as I've mentioned, you need some sort of story, some sort of action with it. And how do you action the ecological approach? Well, obviously you do it, but why would you do that instead of something else? So the way I'm going to approach it is by using some of the resources I've got in front of me, the books about skill, acquisition, expertise, etc. So I'm going to use some stories from there. But how do you package that thing? Um, and when I was looking at Crash Course, for those unfamiliar with Crash Course, like get on YouTube, um, but Crash Course, the channel is run by Hank Green and wow, I can't remember the other Green brother. That's really bad. John Green. There we
John.
go. Yeah. Oh, how did I forget John? But yeah, so those two
Yeah, how
ran.
did you forget John? That's a problem.
Those two
True story
ran.
environment.
Yeah. I didn't attune to that information because I didn't see the connections. Uh, but yeah, so those two ran Crash Course, and they still do run Crash Course as a business complexity, blah blah blah. But they did a psychology course. It's like 40 videos about psychology. None of them, none of those videos covers anything ecological. It doesn't cover direct perception from what I've seen. I'm going to go back through them again, but it doesn't cover direct perception, doesn't cover indirect perception. It just covers perception, and it doesn't cover any of the ecological views of way of perceiving, whether it's ecological acoustics, ecological haptics, anything like that is not covered at all. Then when you look at the way that they discuss the brain as computation and probabilities, it's all through information processing. And I'm sitting there thinking, okay, so the crash course that happened almost 10 years ago doesn't cover ecological psychology. Let's have a look at some of the deep dives into psychology. And I'm listening to a 5 hour long lecture about the psychology, the history of psychology, And you've got William in there, and William is the guy that James Gibson got his ideas from. So it's got the foundations of the philosophy, but it doesn't go into ecological psychology. It stops at cognitive psychology and then goes into child psychology, social psychology, and educational psychology and evolutionary psychology. And I'm like, yeah, but where's the eco psych? Uh, so when you talk about, oh, is it in a course or is it no, it's just forgotten. Yeah, memory is the topic of the conversation. Yeah, it's a forgotten psychology, and I say forgotten because even though it's new in air quote marks, J.J. Gibson started it in like 1960s ish, and it comes from William James, which was like original philosophy psychology, bringing it all together, sort of Freud ish around that time as well. You're like, it's not new. It's old. It was just, for whatever reason, ignored and forgotten, I would argue, because the complexity of, well, dynamical systems, quantum physics hadn't really been evolved back then. So I feel, yeah, I obviously I'm biased. I feel like they were ahead of their time and it was forgotten because no one could grasp what in the world they were talking about. And now, when you look at dynamical systems, you look at complexity theory, entropy, and all the other things that related to ecological dynamics, it's like, oh, we can sort of wrap our heads around this. So when it comes to you doing the explanation and stuff, how did it go with memory? Like, where did you use memory as the term, or because I know you brought up the nouns versus verbs.
Yes, I use the noun versus verbs because I think that was something easy to grasp. And it's great because Aaron actually corrected me because I said, like, when I was talking about it, I didn't use noun versus verbs. I was more detailed in my explanation, and Aaron went, verb, noun. I'm like, yeah, exactly. which was nice because she was in the conversation as well. Because she often sits a little bit to the side of the conversation, whereas Aiden and my friend, we both just dive in headfirst, asking hundreds of questions. She's often kind of pauses and sits on the outside. So I wanted to give her some
Mm.
some buy into the conversation as well because it was interesting. And so yeah, I discussed noun versus okay. So memory is a thing, isn't it? And that's why I asked. I said memory's a thing, right? And they're like, mm, they paused. I was like, yeah, yeah, yeah. And it was. I could see just a tick, 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 tick. Both of them just thinking through what they're saying. And Aiden just turned around and said, "I don't think memory exists." All of a sudden, and I'm like, "Interesting. Okay, why?"
But that's literally the biggest tease. You're like, you're teasing out this thing where, okay, maybe memory doesn't exist. They say it, and you're like, yeah, but why doesn't it exist? And like, what? I agree with you now.
Yeah, that's why I always do it because I just like don't agree because of course he's my son, so there are power dynamics there.
Yeah.
So he'll just agree with what I say because I'm his father.
Mm.
Well, he doesn't, but when I want to challenge his thinking to help him to think for himself, because he will just follow me otherwise. And there's no point in that. I was just
I feel that's the same with a lot of people though. It's what one of our friends, mutual friends, said in on Twitter when we were having a bit of a disagreement is about heuristics. Every person, every human works with heuristics. I'm like, yeah, we use heuristics, i.e., laziness, to follow people's ideas. But if you use heuristics too much, then you become reliant on other people's thinking and you don't think for yourself, which is where you need to challenge the heuristics. And if you don't challenge them, then you're just regurgitating information. And when you look at the OECD Compass framework, which I've been going through recently because of the PISA report, they even say being what's their word? Scientifically proficient is to look at varied sources and to challenge, go outside of the box. And I'm like, if adults aren't going outside of the box, how do you expect children to do that? So as soon as someone goes, oh yeah, I think I agree with you, I would then do exactly what you did. Why do you agree?
Mm. Yeah.
What
And
did
it's
they
really,
say?
well, it's just like it doesn't make sense. I'm paraphrasing because it took he was
Yeah.
think about it, but it just doesn't make sense. I'm like, it doesn't, does it? I don't think it makes sense either. Here's what I think. And then that's where verbs, it's like remembering. And there were lots of really fascinating questions. Now, I'm going to go completely off the script. He's in that living room. So I could check if he wants to come on. We can cut this little middle bit out if we can be bothered, but I could ask him to come out and see if he wants to.
Hey, it's up to him.
Chat.
If he wants to come out and have a chat about
I,
memory and
I,
forgetting
I'm
and
I'm gonna go check and see where he's at because I don't actually know because we never got a chance to talk about it more. It's very
yeah,
we had to finish the conversation because
if he's okay being on a YouTube video,
oh he'll cope.
you're still muted,
I'm
John.
muted. I know
There we
that.
go.
I'm a
It's
professional.
kind of like doing funny things with my hair, right? So it's
Yeah, it's fine. Your hair's not important. Tidies your hair up. See?
Yes, yes. Well, that's if people are watching the video, obviously. If it's just audio, they can't actually see you anyway, so you're good.
And that assumes I remember.
True, true, true. Yeah. So for context, we were talking about memory and remembering, depending on what word you want to use. And John wasn't sure where you had got to in your own understanding, so he went away and figured you could explain.
That seems quite broad.
Welcome.
That was the point.
So with regards to what my understanding would be is in terms of like how much people can remember things, or
Yeah, just where would you say we, or do you think we store memories? I don't know where you're at with your understanding, because obviously John and I were just talking about it, and John was saying that he asked you questions about memory and verbing and nouns and whether we store memories or whether they exist, whether memory exists. Like, what are your thoughts on it?
from my experience, it seems that the more, by and large, whether I think it probably varies from person to person to a certain extent, but it seems that the more that you like the more kind of repetitive a certain behavior is, or the more you do of a certain thing, the more likely it's going to be remembered. It's kind of like repetitions, kind of of doing a certain thing can help kind of make it almost become almost second nature, if you like. Whereas, so kind of I think it's probably to a certain extent like a kind of a link between kind of like I don't know, not necessarily a link between, but well, it may well be actually, to be fair. But there's a difference between kind of like conscious and subconscious. Like some things you have to kind of really, like if it's conscious, you're kind of really having to think about something to think about whether or not you're doing something right. Whereas the more you repeat doing something, the more likely it then becomes almost second nature and goes into like subconscious, if you will. Um, yeah, it's like when I personally I play like trumpet, that sort of thing. I do like music, and the first kind of time I'm hearing something, I'm having to physically think about where the chords are going next, for instance. Whereas if once I played that a few times, then it's second nature. I don't really have to think about it. I just do it without really having to really think about it. And, it's like, and I guess the same can be with all sorts of different things. Like when a baby, when they first start to learn to walk, they're probably really having to think about that. But once they've been doing it for a few years, it's you don't have to think about it. So I think it's like the more
So
you do something, the more
I think we're
likely.
gonna both go the same way.
Yeah.
So what happens if, say, for example, in our kitchen,
Mhm.
there's a basket that's moved in front of you. How does
What, like the basket of
yeah, like the basket that's quite literally there right now.
Yeah.
Like if that gets moved in front of you,
Hmm.
what then? Do you just fall over the basket?
It has to be moved in front of me exceptionally quickly for me to. Yeah, normally if it's moved in front of me,
How
if
many
it's moved
times?
in the way, I just have to figure out a way of walking around it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So how many times have you repeated that action of that specific basket being moved directly in front of you?
And I guess if that's accompanied as well with you kind of looking in my general direction, if you're looking at me in a certain way, I might be thinking, okay, do you want me to do something with this basket? Do you want me to put the clothes out of this basket into the washing machine, or do you just yeah, is this pointed? Is that a way? I guess there's quite a few different nuances as to which way that could go, sort of, depending on what your intentions are as well, and trying to read that on the fly as well.
You were saying that something becomes second nature and something becomes, I assume, somewhat autonomous, so you don't have to consciously think about it. My guess is that you assume that subconscious ability to perform something is stored somewhere in your unconscious, correct?
Um,
Because how can
I,
you do something if you don't know where it comes from?
I mean, you might be able to kind of draw from past experiences to try and make an educated guess based on past experiences as well, sort of thing. So if it's not, even if it's not exactly the same, you might be able to kind of think, well, okay, well, that's a bit like that. So if I do that might work for that based on a previous experience I've had in the past. So you might be able to kind of make almost like a link in that way. But yeah, I don't know whether it's kind of like the more you do something, whether or not that kind of increases like that strengthens like neurological um links in the brain, like pathways in the brain or whatever. Yeah,
So is that
whether or
every experience or only certain experiences?
not.
There isn't a right answer, by the way.
Yeah, there isn't.
Not
Genuinely.
entirely, yeah.
There is
entirely
not a right
sure.
answer.
Yes, not entirely sure. It probably depends on how much you do of something and and how naturally it comes to someone. I think really depending on I think having an example probably but no, I don't think it's kind of clear cut. It's not like every single thing works the same way like that. I think it is on a sliding scale depending on what you're doing at any given moment and how used to that doing that thing you are. If that makes sense.
John's ears just pricked up. I assume he's just thought about attenuation.
Yeah.
And synchronicity, yeah?
Yeah, I was also thinking about repetition without repetition because he's sort of touching on that, but not quite touching on that. It's great.
Well, yeah. So when you talk about playing the trumpet, obviously when you play the trumpet, it's always slightly different. It can never be exactly the same because you might have moved slightly to the left, slightly to the right, your finger or thumbs, slightly different places on the trumpet, but you can still play the same note. The action of playing a note is still roughly the same, but there's still slight variations every time you do it, which is the idea about repetition without repetition. You're repeating it, but not exactly the same. Which for when you think about memory, are you remembering the exact way you did it before, or you're remembering certain parts about it? And if you are remembering certain parts about it, what parts are you remembering? And if you are remembering it, is it conscious or subconscious? Because I can't imagine when you play the trumpet, you think about every single micro action you're doing.
No. I think that would have been more the case when I first started learning trumpet, way back when I was when I was like 7. But yeah, quite a lot of that has over the years become kind of not all of it, but quite a good proportion of it has become, I think, perhaps become subconscious over the years.
It's interesting from a perspective because having someone who is firmly in the cognitive boat as such, I am beginning to see what you saw when we were talking now. Because I'm just like, cool, that's related to this. Whenever you don't have quite you're surfing around the surface of an answer, if you want to call it that. It's not an answer, it's an idea. I'm like, that's there. That can be explained here. That can be explained with this. That can be explained with that. Whereas in cognitive psychology or cognopsych, there's do you notice that there's it's this, but also there is all of these caveats. There's all these things like, oh, but this isn't a thing, but not here. But it's different. But it's different. But it's different. Like you keep repeating yourself, having to say it's different. It's different here. It's depending on this. Depending on that.
I also wonder whether the philosophy of, if you will, of if that's the right term, of kind of how things kind of work, like in terms of like the cognitive, like thinking of it in that sort of way, whether or not that actually is a diverse way enough of thinking about it to accommodate the fact that with people with autism, Asperger's, with ADHD, that sort of thing as well. Or whether that's a whole...
We're going there in this topic.
Or whether, of course, I imagine that must change how people would think as well, or well, not necessarily change how people would think, but change how people would perceive certain things, how they process it.
Oh, you said the word. You said the word. Here we go.
You said process.
You said the word process.
Oh, have I got...
No, you're fine. You're fine.
Yeah.
So here's a question for you,
Mhm.
if I may take this one, because this is really fun.
Mhm.
If you are in a room
Mhm.
with neurodiverse people,
Yeah.
and there is one person who is not neurodiverse,
Okay.
are they neurodiverse or are you neurodiverse?
I think in that context, relatively to the rest of the people in the room, they are neurodiverse, but it depends on whether or not you're talking about in general throughout the population as a whole, or in that context of what is the majority in the room at the time, because that's two kind of different things
So
in a
it's
way, isn't it?
dependent, would you say it's dependent on the environment you're in?
Mm. In a more literal sense, yes. I think if you're kind of like taking it as a broad spectrum in terms of like the population as a whole, then it would be, then that's where the term of neurodiverse would come from, sort of thing, in the sense that, yeah, that people, that the main reason as to why it's considered neurodiverse, if you will, is because it's different from what the majority of people across the world, across the country. Um,
How do we know what the majority across the country or world is? Because obviously people in third world countries aren't tested for neurodiversities because it's not a thing in those countries.
um, that's a fair point. I think that's probably like taking it like an educated guess based on what what the general could like, what the majority of how the majority of people think in countries where that is kind of relatively well
So
tested.
you're reducing the sample size to an assumption. You've assumed a sample size, and you're like, okay, the majority of people over here don't think like these people. So
In Western Europe or America, for instance, yeah, I imagine that a good. Obviously, it's becoming more and more research and that sort of thing all the time. I think even 20, 30 years ago, there was nowhere near as much known about kind of neurodiversity as there are now, for instance.
I
But yeah,
disagree.
sorry.
I disagree. Because when you look at the term neurodiversity,
Yeah.
the social term, the way it's used is certainly different. But when you look at the science behind what it means to be different, i.e., the needs of a learner, the needs of an individual, I would say we knew a lot of the information before the popularization of the term neurodiversity from Judy Singer. Like when you look at the needs, working memory or memory in general or remembering something, that research has been done since since philosophy came out, which is like AD time. It's obviously well before neurodiversity. And when we look at the needs of individuals to socialize, again, that again goes back to social theories in philosophy, psychology, which is well before neurodiversity. So I think the information that people use for categorizing and labeling neurodiverse people, the research has been there for centuries, but the label has been added recently. Would you disagree?
I think the label has been added recently. I don't know whether or not that's because certain people have kind of, so within those fields, have kind of done more digging, if you like, in terms of trying to figure out what that is, and then yeah, in terms of like certain philosophers or whatever, or whether or not, I don't know whether that information is all. So are you suggesting that information has always been there, but it's not really been discovered, if you will, or is that?
I think it's always been there, and I think there has always been differences. I think what I'm saying, I think, is the labels that people are adding is trying to constrain, they're trying to sample size what the information we have, which when we relate that back to memory, it's trying to say, okay, this is a thing. This is what we know. This is a chunk. It's a schema. It's a thing that we know, and we can use that as a rule to do something else. But as we've discussed with the trumpet playing, everything is slightly different. Like there's always slightly different situations. So the situation where John just explained, where you've got, say, 99 people with ADHD, one person without, who's the neurodiverse person? You could
Yeah,
argue it's the one rather than the 99. But when you take the 99 into a different situation, now you would add a different label.
yeah.
That's how I see memory. When you look at memory and neurodiverse, they are labels we've added through language to make things easier to explain, but it doesn't really explain anything when you change the situation. Would you agree?
So it doesn't really, sorry, so it doesn't really explain anything that
It doesn't explain what's going on, how to reproduce it, how to do something else. It just isolates. It describes the situation. So we could describe this situation as there are three people here, but
And
it
I do
doesn't
wonder.
explain anything about it.
I wonder also whether or not that is I might be barking up the wrong tree here. That that the kind of the labels, like the neurodiverse labels, like like autism, ADHD or whatever, those are kind of almost ascribed, if you like, to like to make it so that people who aren't neurodiverse, to kind of make it so that they understand more as to what the differences are. Maybe I don't know whether the label is to say, well, this person has this, therefore they think like this, because it's not perhaps the same as what. So there's kind of putting labels on to make it more understandable to neurotypical people, maybe. I think that's a part of it as well.
So out of curiosity, do you think I'm neurotypical or neurodivergent?
Oh, I don't really know you well enough to know one way or another. Possibility of neurodiversion in some way, but I couldn't put a finger on what. I'm not gonna. I don't want to cause offence or anything like that. I don't know you well enough
Oh
to know
yeah,
either
please,
way, so
please
I don't
cause
know.
offence. This place is a place you can cause offence.
I
Like
don't
this,
know.
you should have seen what you did to me.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you're good.
I don't know. Yeah.
So because the conversation that we've just had about labeling,
Yeah.
I am neurodiverse. I have to be neurodiverse.
Got
And
to.
I have to be neurodiverse because in this situation, there are only three people. And I'm not the same as you or John. So I have to be neurodiverse in this situation.
Oh, in this situation, right?
Well, yeah.
Okay. I wasn't sure if you were talking about in the situation or in general.
Well, okay, if we talk about it in general, am I neurodiverse in general then? Again, thinking about the label.
I don't think it's really black or white. I think it's kind of on a sliding scale sort of thing. But I think it's yeah.
Exactly. That's the point. It's a sliding scale. So if the label is a sliding scale and you can be and you can't be at the same time, is it useful?
Guess it depends on who it'd be useful to. I don't know. I think it's probably depending on the severity and whether or not that would affect how whether or not the way those neurodiversities would affect any given person to the extent whereby it would affect them being able to live in day-to-day life and in society. But if it's to the point whereby that affects kind of whether how they function in
I saw John.
society, that would potentially then maybe then create a necessity for diagnosis. I don't know.
Question then. So
yeah.
you mentioned a lot about society, especially here. Like it depends on society. So that from what you're saying, is that label for society, or is it for the individual? Because what I'm hearing is
Probably a bit of both. It depends on what the individual wants to get out of it. Really, I think it'd be.
So
if the person wants to have some closure and say, "Oh, that's the way. That's why I think this way," then it potentially could be helpful in that sense. But beyond that, I think potentially it would be for other people to understand as well. Yeah, but then again.
When you say they think that way, are you talking like mechanisms? So they think so John was mentioning earlier that his son, I'm not going to say name, just privacy and stuff, was saying about memory. Like those people that are slightly different maybe have shorter memory. Is that the sort of thing that you're referring to? So maybe, for example, people with ADHD have a smaller working memory. That's something that's argued online. Is that something that you would say the label is useful for?
To a certain extent, maybe to help other people who understand that, maybe, and
there isn't a right answer, obviously.
Yeah, there really is.
Yeah.
Because the
I'm
way
not sure whether it's more. Yeah, sorry.
the way I was thinking about it is that if, for example, we use that assumption that those people with ADHD have a smaller working memory. Well, can there be people that are arguably neurotypical with a shorter or smaller or less capable working memory than those that are neurodivergent? Well, I would argue yes, because you can look at diseases and issues, and those people may be neurotypical, but they've got a disease or a mental issue that's come about from a physical injury or anything like that that may have impaired their ability to remember something, which
Yeah.
when you test for working memory, well, now it's lower. So does the label account for them? Obviously not.
So one of my relations is one of my family members, unfortunately, he's getting he's quite elderly now, and he's got Alzheimer's. Just again, quite a, and that I guess is a classic case of quite a lot of people who in older life sort of have Alzheimer's dementia, and that can affect kind of memory as well, sort of in quite profound ways. I think it seems that that sort of things isn't necessarily that well understood, sort of thing. I think it's becoming more understood all the time, but how but
Yeah, because I don't think memory, like when John asked earlier, he was saying, what is memory? I don't think memory can be explained yet. I don't think we have a good way to explain it. That's just me. That's my opinion.
I think quite a lot of people have been suggesting that it can be compared to like a computer and that sort of thing, but that doesn't seem quite right in a way, but I'm not
Why
entirely
not?
sure or not there's a better way of it. But at the same time, I'm not entirely sure, as well as that not being quite right, I'm not entirely sure if there's a better way of explaining it with the understanding that we have. It's
You might have missed that one, but
why not?
both me and Danny both
Why
went,
not?
why not? The reason why we're laughing is not because we're laughing at you. For context, that is literally the question I asked Aidan, and we were discussing that question that we asked. So why not?
He was just saying that he doesn't think there's a better way to explain memory from, well, you said our understanding. I would argue there are other ways of explaining memory, but it gets into very complicated physics, quantum physics, dynamical systems theory, complexity theory, and fluid dynamics, which
pretty in-depth stuff.
Well, a lot of people don't know about it because they don't study it and they don't talk about it. But when you
all in schools on that sort of level, I do say.
Well, it's not taught, but when you think about memory, people say, "Oh, RAM." They have RAM. They have long-term memory, short-term memory. That's used in everyday language.
Yeah.
But when you look at 60, 70-year-olds, they weren't taught about RAM as computers. They weren't taught in IT about short-term and long-term memory. That's not a thing. So somehow they've learned how computers remember stuff through everyday language. Could we do the same with fluid dynamics? Probably. But people don't explain the way they remember through fluid dynamics, so it's just not remembered.
Right. So I wonder whether I'm still trying, learning more about it all the time. But
We all are.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, of course. But I think I don't know whether this is related to what you're saying. I think it probably is, but I think that for example, with a family member, my granddad, he's got Alzheimer's, and and I remember for a few years, as time's kind of gone on, it seems that his short-term memory, like remembering like what he'd had for dinner that day, or remember what had happened within the last couple of weeks, forget it. Remembering what had happened 30, 40 years ago, it was like it was yesterday. And whether or not that's two different parts of the brain, and that the part of the brain which is kind of responsible for the more short-term memory sort of type of things, whether that's being damaged, whether or not the neurons and that sort of thing, whether they're being damaged between, to make it so that things aren't really firing right or not. I really don't, I'm not like a neurosurgeon or anything like that to know, or have that level of understanding to know exactly what the reasons are behind it. But and also whether or not there's also been trying to figure out whether or not there's actually a link between whether or not there's an increased risk of Alzheimer's and dementia amongst people who are neurodiverse as well. I don't know whether or not there's a link there or not. Whether or not that's even that well understood.
Good questions. John, is there something you want to say? You've been sitting there.
No, I'm just there's so many things I want to say, but I'm just like sorting through my memory banks, trying to process this information.
It's interesting. Obviously, we're talking about short-term memory because it's we're talking about short-term memory because it's a heuristic that we can all use. We all recognize that short-term memory is something time-bound that we are able to remember. So an experience that happened recently. All of us are going to deem recently slightly different. For me, it could be 5 seconds, you could 10 seconds, it could be 2 minutes, whatever. But the actual like storage of short-term memory, that idea, that philosophy, that theory has been debunked. That's not a thing. Inside of cognitive psychology, they've known that for 20, 30 years. Yes, people still talk about it, but that's because they don't keep up with the research, which a lot of people don't have the time to. Working memory.
Beyond any shadow of doubt now, the research has actually proved beyond any shadow of doubt that the short-term and long-term
beyond any shadow, no, never beyond any shadow of a doubt.
There are too many things that cross over with the short-term memory models that conflict with the long-term memory models. So either we don't have long-term memory and it's all short-term memory, in which case make short-term memory redundant, or we have short-term memory in a different way, which is where the working memory models have come in. So working memory, the idea was anyway, was to replace short-term memory models because short-term memory it didn't add up. Things just didn't work out the way it was supposed to, or the way it was theorized anyway, because they're just theories. And so people have come up with this working memory idea. But again, it comes back to time. What is like recent? What is short? What is long term? You were talking about your granddad with Alzheimer's. Long term for him might be 30, 40 years, but long term for me could be 1 or 2 years. I don't remember what happened 2 or 3 years ago unless something triggers that memory. Maybe I'm in the same place or I listen to the same song. So is that long-term memory or is that working memory? You don't know. You can't, from my understanding, you can't identify a memory. And it's when we scan someone, you can't scan them and go, you have a memory about this thing and it's located over there in the brain. You can't do that. we don't know. We don't know how to do that yet. So is it stored?
Like an MRI scan whilst you're thinking of those certain things to see which ones are firing where.
And it's different each time, if I remember rightly.
Right. Okay.
Well, yeah, because
it's never the same.
Yeah, if you're thinking, if we're thinking about 1 add 1, you're thinking about 1 add 1 in one room, so your brain could be triggering neurons in the room you're in, the feelings that you're having when you're sitting down, or you've got a breeze going across you, so you've got different neurons activating at different times, even though you're doing the same calculation 1 add 1. So what neurons are the 1 add 1 bit? And even when you do add 1 add 1, is it from a board, a whiteboard? Is it from a blackboard? Is it from a computer, phone? Did you do the calculation? Did you automatically somehow recall the answer rather than doing the calculation? Heavy thinking, light thinking. So even though neuroscience tells us, oh yeah, neurons are active. Yeah, but what does that mean? we can't point at a neuron and go, that neuron activated 0.0001 more than the last time it did. So that must be the we have no idea. Like we don't have the resolution to isolate that. So a lot of it's all guessing. But people still assume that, oh, we've got a store and it's stored in our brains. See, but why? Why is it stored up here? I don't know whether you've had this experience, something I spoke to John about. When you're in a car, and if someone says, oh, do you know the lyrics to the song? And they say the name of the song, I don't know. And then as soon as the song stops playing, you're like, oh yeah. And then you start singing along to the song, but you don't really know the next words. You just know the words as the song's played. Have you had that experience?
Yeah, as it's kind of happening. To be fair, I'm not very good at remembering words to songs. I'm not very and sometimes I've actually been known to actually kind of be able to play a song from start to finish, know exactly how to play it, can play it on trumpet, no problem. I haven't got a freaking clue what it's called. But then people actually come up to me afterwards, like, oh, do you know what that song's called? Yeah, what's that song called? I was like, I don't know. I thought, how can you not know? You just played it. I was like, it goes like this, and it's So I think that's I think although that's not exactly the same, that's kind of that's probably it's.
Well, it's the same thing though. Is it stored in your brain, or does your body remember how to play that song? Does your body remember what it feels like to do those things? And if your body remembers, well, how does your body have a memory store?
But where's it stored? Is it stored in your fingers?
Well, funny
because that's how you play. You play, and actually, actually,
Hmm.
that's what you do.
Well, but
Whenever you hear stuff, he does the fingering.
well, that's what I think. I kind of that sound is that that sound is that fingering. I was like, yeah, and
So does that mean your fingers have memory?
well, that's not my fingers. I would imagine would be assuming here that it'd be something in the brain sort of thing that's telling the fingers what to do.
That's very fast, though.
So is walking and running.
Interesting.
Yeah,
This,
motor
this,
movements.
this is as natural to me as like that's like that's as natural to me as someone like just walking down the street. Because I've been doing that since I was 7. So it's like
That's
more.
that's a trained skill.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so the way I would explain that is you have a trained skill, and the information that you're perceiving in the environment, i.e. the ability to play the trumpet, is far better than mine. You can attune to that information far better than me. And you could say, like, there's two ways to explain that. From cognitive psychology, they would say, well, you are remembering and it's autonomous to you. But there is no way to identify that it's autonomous to you unless we see you do it. Like, you've got to do the thing. Like, I wouldn't know that you'd be able to play the trumpet unless you told me. Like, there is no way for me on the outside to see that you can do the thing, that you can remember how to do the thing. And the same with me. Like, you wouldn't be able to know if I could or couldn't do it unless I tried to do it. And that's the information in the environment that we're seeing. So
And
we are
proof.
remembering how to do the skill
Mm.
as we perform the skill, rather than, oh yeah, I know how to do the thing. Andrew Wilson, a guy that talks about ecological psychology, said that right now you could argue that I can't do anything apart from sit here and talk, because there's no evidence that I can do anything else. There's no evidence that I can juggle. There's no evidence that I can, and then I could list off loads of other skills, unless I actually do it, unless someone has consciously seen that I can do it. And that to me is where memory is very fluffy. Because unless someone can consciously, or someone can consciously attest to an experience they've had with you, there is no proof that the memory exists. So,
And for example, with the trumpet, like you doing that, that could just be you tapping. It could be you tapping out a rhythm. Someone who plays drums will think you're doing a rhythm. Someone who plays guitar may think you're kind of finger picking, like the context itself.
Yeah. So unless someone has it like experience of knowing,
yeah,
they
because
wouldn't necessarily know that that's
to me, you could just be tapping your fingers, and to be honest, that's what it looks like.
fair enough.
But yeah, and that's where I would argue.
Obviously, in that sense, it is. But obviously, if I get the trumpet out now and show that, you'd see that the two do correspond, obviously. But yeah, obviously, I think that's probably also as well like what maybe that's what part of the reasons are behind like you say, because like, without necessarily knowing what that's probably part of the reasons as to why you kind of got like like degrees and grades and that sort of thing to almost to in a way to prove to other people sort of thing that that you can do what you say you can do, if that makes sense, or especially amongst people who don't know, who haven't seen
in that specific environment, in that specific context.
to say like a grade 8 or a degree.
Because you could have someone who has a grade 8 in like piano, but get them to improvise.
Yeah,
they can't.
Yeah, true. You can get people
So in that,
like classically, and be able to kind of play a concerto like that sort of thing, or be able to read and be able to sight read, and then take that same person and ask them to like improvise without anything written in front of them. And in some cases, they might be able to do that, whereas you might have a jazz musician who be able to improvise but not be able to read a dot either. It's horses of courses, isn't it? It's not.
It's context dependent.
Yeah.
It's it is the environment that you're in.
The relationship between organism and environment.
Yeah.
That's where, to me, memory comes back, for me anyway, comes back to experience and what you and other organisms have experienced. I say organisms because we include animals in this, in ecological psychology anyway. So when you look at the relationship between yourself and the environment and the emerging skills that you have from past experiences, you could argue that is then memory. It's the ability to perform a skill, having learned, whatever that means, from past experiences. So you remembering something, this is knowledge of or knowledge about. You could remember information about something, but not necessarily be able to perform the skill. And this is where you see coaches and teachers of anything, and they say, oh, ask a question, you give answer back to question, but when it goes to actually doing the thing, they can't. What notes do you need to play? A, B, C, D. And then they go and play Z, Q, Y, whatever. You're like,
Yeah.
well, that makes no sense. I know there's not those notes, but but it's like they can answer the question.
The analogy still, it's still, I know what you mean.
Yeah, they can answer the question, but they can't necessarily play those notes.
Yeah.
And that's where
Same thing with someone learn to drive, for instance. You could tell them how to set the gas and bring the clutch to the biting point, but until they start doing that, they're not going to learn that really and learn how to be able to do that well and how to do that without really having to think about it until we start doing it repeat it.
Yeah, which is where like remembering and memory, I think are a little bit different in application. A lot of people say, oh, he has memory, or they have memory and they can remember how to do this thing. No, they can remember information about the thing. They don't necessarily remember how to do the thing, because if you haven't done something for years, you may forget. I can remember how to ride a bike, but I don't know whether I can actually ride a bike unless I get on a bike and ride it. But yeah, that's my thinking. John, have you got any other thoughts that have ever come up during the conversation?
Oh, there's so many. I love them all. I think very much it's really interesting to look at this from a cognitive lens versus, so you're kind of viewing a lot of it from a cognitive standpoint of philosophy.
I disagree.
Yeah, I realized as I was saying that, I was like, yeah, I don't know actually, because he's asking the questions and quizzing it slightly, and there's context, and maybe not at the same time.
A bit of an understanding, but quite a lot of what is taught, I guess, in schools and that sort of thing is limited to like the cognitive. It's probably limited in terms of perhaps even limited to like how most people think as well, sort of thing. And so, well, that's that. Therefore, you really don't necessarily. That's kind of more the surface layer. You don't necessarily need to know any more than that, if that makes sense. But
yeah, I think the way that you're explaining things is the way that we would explain things through an ecological lens. But when it gets to a point that you're not quite sure, it then revolves back to common language. It's in the brain. It's sort of like you follow the path, the same path we do. You get to a junction, we go left, you go right. and you going right is, I don't know, I'm just going to assume it's in the brain somehow, some way.
Sticking with the devil you know sort of thing, as opposed to like, oh, hello, what's this? Yeah, just
exactly.
We're going to go along this path anyway.
It's poke the other thing.
Exactly, and that's where I think a lot of people sit. It's they'll get to a point, like we'll be able to explain, have conversations. We'll get to a point, and the ecological psychologist will take left, and it's this small little dirt road that not many people go down. You don't want to go down the main road that everyone drives through. You're like, oh yeah, that's easy.
Follow like sheep have gone astray. So I think, yeah,
exactly. The problem is though, when it comes to applying that, or essentially going back on yourself on that dual carriageway that everyone else is going, you can't turn around. You can't do a U-turn. you can't just go back.
If there's an accident on that road, you're waiting there for hours. Whereas someone who's taking the courage to go down the back road might actually get there quicker.
Exactly, and that's the argument that
I love that.
take.
That is beautifully that you used cars. And of course you did. Exactly.
Cars and music are kind of two like things that I'm kind of. I guess cars is probably more relatable for more people as well, I suppose, in a way. So kind of.
Well, I do remember our brief conversation when we met up at. I think it was before Berlin. So yeah. So yeah, and the only reason I remembered that is because we're having this conversation now, and I remembered when you were talking about trumpets, you had a conversation about driving, and I was like, oh yeah, you like cars. If you had asked me like before this conversation, does Carl, I think that's your name, does Carl know about like cars and truck? No, I've no idea. But because we're in this conversation,
because we're in this environment, like
it's triggered perhaps memories that wouldn't have necessarily been. You wouldn't have remembered straight off the bat, sort of thing, had you not had this conversation, sort of thing. Yeah.
Whether it's triggered memories or whether it's I've been able to remember, that's the way that like EcoPsych would explain the situation slightly differently. instead of saying I've triggered memories, which is
Hmm.
assuming it's stored somewhere in here. If it was stored, I have no idea how to find it apart from being in this situation.
Hmm.
Or I would explain what I remembered as we were going through. So through perception and action of this experience, I remembered information which relates to something in the past. So it sounds like you're trying to add words to make it more complicated, and it sounds like we're trying to overcomplicate something that's easy to explain. Oh yeah, it's just stored somewhere. But if you make that assumption through the explanations when it comes to teaching, and you say, "Oh, just remember XYZ." Well, how do they just remember the thing? Oh,
Yeah.
it's stored. Where is it stored? How did they
Yeah.
How
retrieve
do you
that
get it?
thing?
Because I've had people call out and say, "Oh, just do this. Just remember that. It's just easy." I'm like, "Wait, what?" And I'm trying, and
Exactly.
Okay, how?
yeah. Mm.
Exactly, and that's the question that ecological psychologists try and get to. It's the okay, great, you have a memory stored here, but how do you retrieve it? Oh, you retrieve it by repeating it lots and lots and lots. Well, great, now you know the answer, but you don't understand why it's the answer, which is the whole issue with people with tests at school. Like, I remembered for the test, but then when it goes to actually applying it, they don't know how to use it because
Yeah.
their ability to remember it isn't through action, experience, perception, and action. It's through, I just know it's the answer.
I know something that you say about driving is when you take driving lessons, you're not actually learning to drive, you're learning to pass the test.
Well, yeah.
The
But
context
in a lot of cases,
the
especially
context
yeah.
is
Mm.
around passing an exam. And then once you pass the exam, you actually learn how to drive
Yes.
through
Yeah.
being in the environment, through interacting, through seeing how
Mm.
people behave and responding.
I guess the more experience you have of learning to drive prior to passing your test, the more experience you have. Obviously, the more you can kind of like draw upon that sort of thing to be able to. But yeah, but there's no. But even say anyway, say 50 hours of driving lessons versus 100 hours worth, is still, relatively speaking, is still a relatively small amount of driving versus say driving say 50 or 100,000 miles over a few. Yeah, that's you're not going to gain the same amount of experience through 50 hours of driving lessons as you are with with that. You can't really. I
But
guess you might be able to.
I was going
Sorry.
to say, even with, so my dad's a driving examiner, and
Okay.
yeah,
Right.
and even with the amount of distance you've driven, time you've driven, if you go to a place that's different, obviously it's now a different situation, different environment, different experience. And there are some places in the world that don't have roundabouts. So if,
Mm.
for example, you learn to drive in America that don't have roundabouts on your test route or around your area, then you go to the UK, you suddenly hit a roundabout, you go, what is this thing?
Yep.
So
Yeah,
it's
I've seen kind of some footage on YouTube. Funny enough, I've kind of people coming across to America and they can't get over. No one the roundabouts, and they can't get over also how small the roads are, how narrow the roads are relatively over here, and how you get the little windy B roads and stuff. And in America, I don't think you really have that anywhere near as much. There probably are a few places that you do get that, but just nowhere near. There's just way more space basically. I find it a little bit. Also, a couple of times I've driven over in France, for example, and it does take a little bit of adjusting to driving on the opposite side of the road as well, and taking roundabouts reversed and kind of reversing everything. That's a little bit of a yeah, excuse me, a little bit of a little
but
bit of a
that's the
Mind
thing.
fuck.
mind fuck.
That's the
Yeah,
thing though. You have the ability, you have the skill, you have the expertise to drive the car, to move the vehicle,
yeah.
but putting the vehicle and those skills somewhere else changes how you move, whether the steering wheel's on the other side of the road or the actual mechanics of the vehicle could change. Obviously, driving on the road could change, but that's repetition without repetition in practice. Like no road is exactly the same. You never drive the exact same line on a road. So the more experience you gain, the more practice you have, the
Mm.
better you are able to use the information in that new experience, which is remembering. You are remembering past experiences to educate how you're going to perform whatever skill it is you're doing. And some people, so inside the UK, there are some places that don't have dual carriageways. So people take their test and they don't go faster than 30 or 40 mile an hour. Then they go on a
Yeah.
dual carriageway and they go and sit at 40 or 45 mile an hour, and everyone else behind is like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
But it's because they haven't experienced it, and It's somewhat similar, which I argue with my dad about this sometimes. On test, there are certain things you should do and certain things you shouldn't do. The highway code, follow those sorts of things. So you shouldn't undertake. You shouldn't sit in the right side, in the right lane of a dual carriageway from one roundabout to another roundabout if you're only going to sit at 30. If they're going to go right, it's easier for them to do that. And the constraint, to use an ecological term, the constraint there in the test is, well, you'll fail if you sit in the right lane.
If you sit in the right-hand lane sort of thing, and you're not overtaking anything, it's just kind of
Right, if there's a car behind
you.
you and they want to go 40 and you're sitting at 30, well, they can't undertake, or they're not supposed to undertake you. Most people do, but you would fail your test. Outside of a test environment, well, now you're not going to fail the test. People just sit in the right-hand lane and wind everyone else up on the road. But that is where, if you have a memory stored, they would just use that, like take the memory out of the library, the bookshelf, the whatever. They put it in the computer. Right, I will now sit in the left lane because that's what I need to do. No, they look at the environment and go, I'm going to go right at the next roundabout. I'm going to sit in the right lane. Is there anything in this environment to stop me from doing that? No. So they do. And that's where educators and learners, you look at it and go, well, if you have a memory store, why do they not do what you told them to do? Because the environment's different.
And also that's exactly what teachers say, or people who don't get it. To very, 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 very grossly simplify that. It's literally, well, why don't you just do this? Just do this.
I told you to do.
I told you, right? You know this, so do it. Why aren't you doing it? And it's like, because there are so many different things happening here in the environment that you cannot see that I see. And you do not know how to see those things that I see, because we see different things. The way we perceive influences how we act, and how we act influences how we perceive. And that beautiful, it's not cyclical, but it sort of is, like, that interaction with the environment is key.
Yeah.
Well, to the philosophy.
Yeah, this is to our philosophy. Obviously, some people may come on and be like, no, you're completely wrong, because epistemic memory and the ability to do Bayesian statistics within our brain, even though humans suck at doing Bayesian statistics, but apparently we use it for
I suck at doing 1 + 1.
Basic statistics.
I think I showed a video on Bayesian statistics because Aidan asked about Bayesian. He likes maths, so I showed him Bayesian statistics, and he was like, "Cool, can I watch more?" And I'm like, "No." Because there's a simpler explanation for all of this, Aidan.
Yeah, but the math probability is still cool. You can use the math probability outside of these explanations if you want to. Look, just look at the free energy principle and other things like that are heavily engrossed in physics, physical mechanics, engineering, and all that sort of stuff. You're like, that's all great explaining, like, machines. We're not machines. We're organisms. They're different. But yeah, something that I wanted to bring into this conversation, is somewhat related. At the moment, there is, I've seen online anyway, a lot of arguments about Gen Alpha and them being dumb. A lot of it comes from America, so bear that in mind. Caveat. Well, the people that are talking about it are, let me get this generation, I think it's Gen Z. Not millennials, the Gen Z. They are teaching Gen Alphas. And the Gen Z teachers are saying that the Gen Alphas aren't behaving, then they're not doing what they're meant to do, etc., essentially moaning about the children. And what I find interesting is the actual situations that they talk about. So one of them was a ballet teacher, and she said her 5-year-olds don't stand where she tells them to stand. And she said that is due to bad parenting from the millennials, which I'm like, you told a child to stand still, like a 5-year-old child to stand still. What do you expect them to do? Yes, miss, I will stand on this spot and wait for you to say go. No, it doesn't happen unless you're in the military.
They're not robots.
Exactly my point. They're not machines. But yeah, so she was saying, oh, it's bad parenting. I'm like, okay. And they just don't listen. I'm like, but why would they listen to you? What do you have that they want, they need? Like, every organism is goal-based. They want something, they go do it. Yeah, they want something, they go do it. I'm hungry, I'm going to go get some food. I'm bored, I'm going to go do something rather than laying on my back staring at, like, a blank screen. Like, we are goal-based. We're goal-directed organisms. So when you tell someone, stand on a spot and wait for me to say go, and their goal is, I want to expend lots of energy because I'm a child, I want to run around and do loads of handstands on walls, they're not going to do that unless you give them a good reason to. And they blame the parents.
Incentive.
And they blame the
No.
kids. And I'm like, no.
So someone's just like, oh, hello, I'm pulling a memory out of my memory bank. Ooh. Is it Pensive from Harry Potter?
Yes.
Pensive, yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Pensive.
Right.
I'm just thinking about Aiden and goal-directed behavior because
That's what I mentioned.
Oh boy. I'm bored. Okay, we'll go do something. Okay, go on. But his the thing he's trying to get to is his laptop, is his computer, is his devices. And I'm just like, no. No.
That was the other argument point, and it's in the PISA results. For context, PISA is the Program for International Student Assessment, and they assess 15 to 16 year it's 15 years and 16 months to and 6 months to 16 years and 2 months. They test those students across educational systems in the OECD countries, which is like 81 countries, and then they give them assessments and say these are good or these are not good results.
Year 11s, basically.
Yeah,
No.
yeah. Year 11 in the UK, but grades and all over the world.
Yeah, so 15 and a half to 16, yeah.
Yeah. So the results of the PISA assessment, it came out. I'm doing a video about it, long report, etc. It's like 500 pages of volume 1. There's 5 volumes, so great reading. But the report on devices, they were saying you need to limit the devices, but not ban the devices. And when we go, there's going to be some zigzagging here. When we go all the way back to what affordances are in ecological psychology, one of these social psychologists suggested that affordances are also social. So there can be social affordances. So as technology develops, we as human organisms develop affordances with technology. And obviously, the kids that grow up with devices, they are the affordances. If they are looking to do something, they will use their experiences, past experiences, their ability to remember. They'll use those experiences to direct their behavior. I know I felt like this when I was on that device. So they go back to that device. Unless they have an experience where they have a similar experience, like, oh, I'm not bored and I'm doing this other thing, they're not going to learn another resolve, another outcome, another behavior for that input, for that response, for that situation that they're in. So when you look at the PISA results, what they were saying is that it's poor, basically too much device usage or misuse, i.e. they're using it for something they shouldn't be using it for. So instead of learning something, like doing something learning related, they're just scrolling TikTok for 3 hours. Like, that's not necessarily productive. If they're watching a lecture for an hour, then maybe doing some notes on their computer and something else. And the other, now it's 3 hours of directed learning. They're doing something with it. So you talking about Aiden and the devices makes me think, okay, with the affordances in the environment they're in, if he's bored, what sort of activity does he actually want to be doing? Because I imagine he's got an activity in mind that he wants to be doing.
Yeah, watching YouTube. Which is related to his it's most of the time Minecraft. Some of the time he wants to do his writing. And when I hear what he wants to do, that will change my reaction. If he just wants to be on his laptop to watch YouTube videos and solely watch YouTube videos, then I'm going to be like, okay, cool, let's do some drawing. Carry on with your drawing, because you do your drawing. One of the things what you have, he often does other activities super late at night when he's meant to be sleeping. Because obviously we need 8 hours of sleep minimum all the time, and it's not different for each person. And kids need 12 hours.
12.
Supposedly, yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, we can go there later.
Let's not go there. We've already been speaking for an hour.
Yeah, good point. I have another thing to do today. And so whenever I ask what he wants to do on the laptop, if it is just YouTube, I'm like, okay, well, have you finished your drawing? Because he likes to draw and he likes to do his little animated character. Have you done some animated characters today? No. Okay. Do you want to do that then? No. What would you like to do then? I want to go on my tech. Okay, what do you want to do on your tech? I want to watch YouTube. I'm like, what do you want to watch on YouTube? Minecraft. I'm like, okay.
When does he do play?
Play?
Yeah.
He doesn't play, does he?
I think he used to a little bit more when he was younger. Probably not
Yeah,
as
he
much.
doesn't play as much anymore. Not in the
Okay.
tradition.
I was going to say, so what do you mean when you say play?
Uses imagination in the case of like interacting with us or with his sister and not having any. Okay, this is not correct, but it's an easy way of explaining it. But does not have external stimulus, which he does because he's interacting with it.
There's always external
Yeah, I
stimulus
know.
when you
But
you
you
unless
look
you're
at
dead.
Do you mean like technology, like
technology
phone,
or something
TV?
else, a tool or an item to do it with.
So when you see kids in a playground, that's obviously got physical devices there. There's toys and things. Is that not play?
No. Yes, yes, of course.
But that's what I'm saying. Like
Yeah.
when I think about play, I don't think about the actual materials in the situation. I think about the individual and what the intention of the individual is to do. Because play and practice are essentially when you look at learning, education, etc., play and practice typically are viewed off like side by side. Like you can't practice and play at the same time. Play is different. But then you have the term called deliberate play. You're playing at something deliberately just to explore it, which I think is what most children do on devices, on tech. They are exploring whatever it is online,
Yeah.
which is play. So this is just me guessing here. I'm guessing what Aiden wants to do when he goes on his device is to just play.
Mm.
But you want to say, actually, no, we want to do some practice. Or you want to do some deliberate play.
Yes.
Would that be accurate?
Yes. Yeah. And
And
I have my own preconceived notions of what deliberate play and practice is versus because if he is often when he's on his device researching things, looking stuff up, translating words, in addition, and that's something that he didn't used to he used to just sit and look at his device, just watch a video and not really do anything at all. Now, there is an argument there that some of what he's doing is he's thinking about what he's going to build, get inspiration and excitement for him to play Minecraft, which is quite possible and very possible. And I think it's a tough one for parents because we're often told by society too much device time is bad and they shouldn't be watching YouTube. And obviously, I know this is not true, but if I'm looking beyond myself of like YouTube is bad for kids, you know, brain rot, blah 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 blah.
yeah,
Technology bad, bad, evil technology, stab the technology, never look at technology ever again. And it's interesting because I am more like lenient with Aiden with technology than I am with Erin, which is a deliberate choice. Because when Erin goes on technology, she genuinely just is watching YouTube and just switches off. And it switches off, that's a stupid word, but
yeah.
switches off.
Well, very much in our own little world. I mean,
It is not interacting.
No, carry on with that. When you say like in your own little world, where are you going with that? Obviously, I assume because I'm guessing you're assuming what John's saying is that she's not paying attention to something.
I was thinking kind of so much kind of immersed in doing that one thing sort of thing, like so involved in that, so sidetracked by that everything else is, it's almost like putting a blinkers on a horse sort of thing. So not really aware of what's going on outside of what is on the screen sort of thing because it's so glued into that.
I realized what you picked up on that I didn't.
Hmm?
Cool.
Go on then, John, explain.
Do you think that's bad?
It depends on whether or not it affects.
I love that answer. I love that answer. But in the context that we're specifically speaking about, where Erin is on her phone and just YouTubing, do you think that's bad?
If there's other things that she needs to be doing that needs to be prioritized over that, and that is affecting her way to be able to function or be able to do what she needs to do, that needs to be prioritized over watching YouTube, then that potentially could be bad. I think it's like anything. It's like anything. Technology, like anything else, is okay in moderation. If it just becomes like to the point where it's taking over your life, then it's gonna have quite a
I agree. That's
yeah.
I agree. That's why I'm curious why you, John, as in when I say you, why John, when you said that you treat her differently. Obviously, you're going to treat everyone differently. Does that mean that you reduce the amount of time you give her with devices?
Yes. I am more directive with her device usage.
Why?
Because I add constraints is the more accurate
Yeah,
way.
She's more likely to
as she is much more likely to just spend an entire day and multiple days on a video. And so I add additional constraints to her usage because from my perception, which I realize is flawed, as it always is, like
everyone says.
it's not, she's not engaging with, I suppose, reality.
I can see you're battling now.
I am, yes, because it's good and it's lovely and I love it. See, this is why we're all lovely in here. Yeah, because
yeah, he loves to kill me.
Yeah, she watches sensationalist content because it's fun and it's shiny and it's pretty and it's mummies and I don't know what she watches. I can't stand it.
Pause. Wait, so you don't know what she watches, but you don't want
Oh,
her to watch it.
Okay, I do know what she watches. Oh, fine. Yeah, I do know what she watches. I cannot stand what she watches because I hear what she watches. And
Isn't that you being biased? Maybe you just like what your son watches more, so you let him watch it.
yeah, probably. Quite possibly.
I'm just playing devil's advocate here.
I love it. I hate you too. But yeah, probably it is that. But I also I'm just pausing before I dig myself a deeper hole.
Well, forget the whole. Like we'll move sideways a little bit. We'll move sideways. So when it comes to the information that they are using on their devices, obviously what they're watching will be out of context for us because we don't know their experiences. We don't know what they think they know, what we think they know, etc., etc. So how would you then go about when you add constraints? How do you go and add a constraint in? Is it you can't watch this thing, or you can't watch this thing so much, you can't watch those channels, you can't use this device? Is it a time thing? Like what constraints are you adding in
It
for the
varies.
devices?
Obviously it does. The common one for Erin at the moment is very much like, can you do Duolingo? Because she likes to learn it's something she likes to learn and likes to do.
How do you know that?
Because she keeps asking to do it.
Right.
So she's asking to do it, and the whole family does it. So it's the environment she's in, etc., etc. So I'm like, okay, if you want to watch YouTube, that's fine, but live a Duolingo first. That is often the constraint I put in. And then I think there is time-based constraint in there as well.
So would it be a thing whereby, say, I don't know, for instance, would like a timer sort of thing work? Say, for example, you can watch, say, 1 hour of YouTube, once you've done things you need to do, if you do, say, 20 minutes of Duolingo first. Or
That's
not really
arbitrary.
I don't know if that's.
Which, I mean, I realise as I'm saying that what I'm doing is arbitrary too.
I don't know how you gauge that sort of thing. Like, I mean, how much YouTube is too much? How much Duolingo is enough to warrant the YouTube?
It is depending on the relationship between her and I. Like in the environment,
Right.
what I don't set an arbitrary thing. I don't. Well, as I'm thinking, I think I do, but I don't know whether I do, because it does vary. Because sometimes it's just like go, it's fine.
I do wonder. I think. I mean, is it more? Because I do wonder.
I'm a hypocrite.
You just come to that conclusion.
Okay, I wasn't quite what I
I mean,
was
it's
going to say.
true, but
Yeah.
it is true, and it's something that I need to
Hmm.
consider.
But that's exactly why we have these conversations.
Oh
Because
yeah, hell yeah, I
you
love
challenge
it.
them, you're like, yeah, damn it. Yeah, damn it. I shouldn't be, I need to rethink that. And that's what
Yeah.
reflection is. Because
Yeah.
what I would preface that with, or what I would extend that with, is you said she enjoys Duolingo and she wants to do it,
Mm.
but then she chooses not to do it.
Mm.
So she obviously, like, the way I would look at that is the behavior doesn't show that she actually enjoys to do it. Otherwise, she would go and do it. Like,
Mm.
and when we were discussing, well, a few weeks back, when it comes to warm-ups and warming up to things, if you make them do Duolingo first, are they warmed up to wanting to do that thing, or are you making them do that thing? In which case, now it's practice. You need to practice your Duolingo before you can
Yeah.
play.
Mm.
I
Which
think it depends on the instance as well. I think, well, in Ern's case, I think I think I can understand this as well, sort of thing. That if, she might kind of enjoy doing the Duolingo, but at the same time, if there's certain things which are quite, say, challenging and that sort of thing that she's not finding as easy, sort of thing, and certain bits on the Duolingo she finds quite difficult, or she gets quite a few things wrong, she then gets perhaps a bit disheartened and wants to kind of throw the phone across the room or something, and then doesn't then gets upset for something because she's not being able to do that a certain part of Duolingo well, and sometimes she can be quite like quite easily quite say upset and then get disheartened and not want to do the other thing, the other part of Duolingo that she is quite good at and enjoys.
I
So
love that.
yeah.
I love that. That's the exact point I was getting at, though, because
Hmm.
if she's had that experience, John can then go, "Why aren't you on Duolingo?" And if she says, "Oh, I'm struggling with X, Y, Z," John
Yeah.
now knows, "Oh, I need to help." But if
Yeah.
you
Mm.
just say, "Oh, you need to do the thing," well, you're not going to get that out. I was going to say athlete then because I'm so used to sports coaching. You won't get that out of her because you haven't given her the autonomy in the space to go, actually, no, I don't want to do it. Well, why don't you want to do it? Well, it's
Mm.
boring. Is it boring? Are you struggling with something? Is there something that you're at? Or is it just you're not interested in it by now? Because obviously we have peaks and troughs with interest. And if someone isn't interested in something, you shouldn't force them to do it because well, now you're forcing them against their will. And obviously kids need to play. Not too much, of course, constrained, but still play, directed play, etc., etc. But yeah, love that point. That's exactly where I was thinking as well.
I think kind of, I don't know whether this is probably more of from an earlier point with regards to like, technology, and I think that is I think it probably has been mentioned before that it seems that quite a lot of, I don't know how well whether it changes how teaching and that sort of thing needs to be like done at all or not. I would imagine it probably does, but like how um it seems that obviously like technology sort of thing in the last say 20 years or so has become so almost so into such an integrated part of our lives sort of thing
Yeah.
that the people like say people who say were born after the year 2000 for example don't really know life without that level of technology if you like, whereas people like millennials if you like we're probably the last generation whereby in our childhood we can remember stuff before like having a mobile or having an internet straight at our fingertips straight away.
So
So
I'm intrigued by this. And I'm watching my bias here.
I'm intrigued by this. Wait, let me just work out what words I want to
Let me
use.
just work out a word.
have I hit a bit of a nerve?
No. Because
This is John trying to play safe so he doesn't say something and then realize actually no, I said something stupid.
yeah. So what I am hearing, and I just want to check that I understand what you're saying.
Go on.
Do you think it is bad that technology has become prevalent? Do you think it's bad or it's because that when I hear you talk, because we talk about this a lot,
I think it's
and have this debate a lot. So I'm being careful with how I'm communicating to avoid too much of my bias coming in and preconceived notions. So I'm asking the question first. Do you see it as a negative thing overall?
I think it's in moderation. I think if you've got someone who's like literally glued to their phone for like 10 hours a day sort of thing, that's not great sort of thing, but or more, I think but it's one of those. I think I don't know. It's like
I'm going to be pokey now.
okay,
I'm going to be super pokey at you now.
I'm sometimes guilty of it as well. I'm not saying
that's okay, and so am I.
I
So
think a lot of people are to be perfectly honest with you.
So is that a bad thing being glued to the phone for 10 hours a day? Is that what you're saying?
I think if it if
And
it's becoming, but
what is moderation? Like that is a question, because you said everything in moderation.
I think yeah, if it becomes something you become reliant on in order to be able to live day to day like life to the point whereby it's kind of almost like affects your mental health if you don't go on it, sort of thing. So is it? At what point does it become like an addiction? It's almost like a lesser form of like alcohol. Alcohol, for instance, someone can, it's okay to have maybe like 1 or 2 pints every couple of days, or 1 or 2 pints a day. But if you have to have that 10 pints a day and you feel like absolute shit if you don't have those 10 pints a day, then that's too far. Do you know what I mean? And at what point does using that technology become detrimental to someone's health? I think it's like it's not. I don't think it's necessarily an exact right answer to exactly how much is too much for any given person. I think it's
So would you say that technology is the problem?
mm,
Because what I'm hearing is technology is an
it's
addiction.
it's potentially can be an addiction and can be a problem if it's left just to do whatever without being able to put any sort of have awareness or kind of constraints on how much is too much, sort of thing, and whether or not
So how
it
much?
affects
How?
mental
So
health.
I'm on my device
Mm.
nearly 60 hours.
What, a week?
Actually, 140 hours a week, I think, something like
Okay.
that. A lot.
Do you use that quite
So
a lot
am
at
I
work?
addictive? Well, yeah, I use it for work, but I use it for other things too. Does that mean I have an addiction?
Mm,
Like what is moderation? Is what I'm
no,
trying
sure.
to.
If someone were to say you weren't allowed to use your phone for 2 days, would you be really upset?
Yeah, I would be very upset.
You're
Exactly.
You,
yeah.
I'm a stepping in because I wanna probe a bit. When
Here
you're
we go.
saying
We're going back now.
it makes me sound like the professor. I'm stepping in. Because it
Yes,
sounds
teacher. Okay, sir.
look, it sounds like John's got preconceived notions, obviously,
I have.
about
Yeah.
what technology is or isn't or should or shouldn't be used. And it sounds like you're trying to sit on the fence, which is fine. Like I also would sit on the fence, but you haven't explained to me anyway what when it comes to moderation, which I think is where John's getting at. When it comes to the moderation, explaining what the use of the device is, because you said phone and then you went to device, and obviously a laptop and a computer, people spend the work days on it, so they need to use those devices because of the way the world works. So I'm assuming when you say 10 hours on their phone, it's 10 hours scrolling TikTok on their phone, not doing anything socially beneficial. Is that where you're getting at?
Yeah, I think if it's like kind of Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, all those. If it's kind of getting glued on those and not really glued on those and not really, and then not really being able to do the things that you need to do in day-to-day life, and if doing those things are at the expense of doing the things that you need to do in day-to-day life, sort of thing, and becoming so and then feeling having to do that in order to be happy. I think that's kind of like if then feeling that like it's kind of I don't know whether or not there's kind of a link between kind of like depression and that sort of thing, and mental health issues in young people, sort of thing, due to the excessive amount of using that sort of thing, or whether but if it's if people are, I think, made aware, which I think they probably are being made more aware of all the time, sort of thing, that I think those sorts of like social media, so they're kind of almost made deliberately to be very addictive, almost like like your machine, sort of thing, like a amusement arcade. They're deliberately made to be very addictive, sort of thing. And I think if I don't know how well that is taught in schools in terms of that in
It's
moderation,
not.
whether or not
Well,
how
yeah,
much is
it's
too
not.
much is but
They,
with
they,
how prevalent it's become in recent years, I think it probably, if it isn't, it should be.
I
Um,
agree. PISA suggests it should also be taught. It's a competency in their framework called digital literacy, but
okay.
Yeah.
schools are actually banning phones instead of trying to teach children how to deal with devices, and they reduce the amount of device usage in lessons
Yeah,
because it causes behavioral issues. So
outright banning it, that's kind of I personally think that's probably more like outright banning kind of the phones, and outright banning technology, sort of thing, in schools. That's kind of a bit like saying, well, in this country, sort of thing, you're not allowed to have any alcohol before the age of 18. And then what do people do when they get to 18? They get absolutely hammered and drunk, and then you get people alcoholism. It's the same kind of thing, but just with technology, isn't it? It's like, whereas say in France, for instance, you've got people are allowed to say, you've got people, with family, they're allowed to, drink from like the age of 14 or something, I think it is. And there's nowhere, yes, there's still obviously going to be, people who are going to get, alcoholism as well, but nowhere near as much. It's not, because it's like not considered a taboo thing to drink.
They've been educated as they grow up, and they've gained,
Yes.
going back to what we were talking about earlier, they've gained experience, they've gained skills, they've gained knowledge and understanding of how to use different things in the environment to get them to where they want to go, rather than being exposed to this thing one time in a day and then overshooting themselves essentially with it. And some of the PISA data with devices is even saying that those kids that are going to schools that have banned phones, when they go home, they don't turn off the notifications and they just live on their phone when they get home. So their sleep is bad.
Compensate for the lack of that they've had in school, sort of, kind of, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you were talking about technology. It's what I was hearing is that you're talking about technology as an addiction.
If
it can be.
It can potentially.
So it can be an addiction if it's on too much or used too much. Is that right? Am I
potentially? I think it also depends on how much the person.
Because I have a high bias.
How much the person is reliant on it, how much of an addictive personality they have. It's all but I think it's
Could the same not be said for everything?
But I think because the technology, relatively speaking, is such a new phenomenon, like, where unlike, say, for example, like smoking or drinking or other things like that sort of thing, they're, and drugs and that, those have been around for much longer, whereas technology, relatively speaking, has not been around anywhere near as much. And it seems that everyone has always been it's always become more widely available. And because also you've got the other thing sort of thing, because of course, like smoking and drinking isn't really those aren't necessarily essential, if you like, to kind of living a day-to-day life. Whereas technology and that has become it's been integrated into day-to-day life in such a fundamental way.
I think people who smoke and drink disagree.
Well,
that is also the thing. Like, I think you'll find that people who smoke and drink socially disagree. Not necessarily addictive, but people go out to the pub afterwards and have, just because it's not something you socially. That's what I think I'm trying to get at. Like,
the social elements
you've made personally is that technology seems to be primarily a tool for addiction. That's what I'm hearing you say, or can be a tool for
I'm not hearing that.
It can be if left unchecked.
If left unchecked, but how do we check that?
John, question for you then. With addiction, just to clear up, what to you is an addiction?
To me, an addiction is something you just cannot stop. Like it is something that's become so ingrained that you cannot, like, even though you know it is a thing that is harming you, you cannot step away from. You do not see an action you can take otherwise, apart from doing it more.
So if we live in a world where digitalization is everywhere and arguably you can't step away from tech, can you not be addicted? Because you have to live with tech. Like if like I wouldn't be able to do any of my job without tech.
Yeah,
does that mean I'm addicted to it?
Yeah.
I think that's the point we're getting at. Like what does an addicted technology person mean? What does that look like? You see people all the time chronically online. That's where I think there's a bit of a barrier, because being addicted to tech there's a potential for it, yes. But what does that look like?
Yes. Yeah, I think that's where I was kind of like not getting.
Yeah.
What does that look like to be addicted?
Just general question, like what does a person addicted to tech look like? We know that obviously you've named all.
Because I'm addicted to tech. Like that if we're using time as the only basis, I have an addiction to tech.
I think it's a combination of time and also whether or not that addiction to tech, say for instance, is to the detriment of what you want to do in life.
And when you look at clinically at what an addiction is, that's what comes up. It's negatively impacting lifestyle or well-being, which is where I think your point with misuse of tech is prudent. Like you can use tech, you can chronically use tech and it not be negative. And that's where I think a lot of
Yeah.
parents forget, like, just because someone's on tech a lot, just because they're on their phone 10 hours a day, doesn't mean it's negative. Because if someone's on their phone 10 hours a day, maybe 6 of those hours is talking to their friends in a group chat. Well, how is that different from them being in a park for 5 hours and then walking home with their friend?
Yeah, that's true.
If you're used to tech, it's what you grow up with. Is it wrong to be on your phone for 6 hours if you're talking with your friends?
No, in that context, I wouldn't say so. No, it's no, quite. It's so relative depending on what what the use of that tech is primarily for.
I agree.
Hmm.
I agree, especially when it comes to education, because I've spoken with a lot of lecturers at my university and they vehemently disagree. They hate the idea of video lectures. They hate the idea of them. You need to lecture in a lesson because that's how people learn. Absolute rubbish.
During dare I say it, during like kind of the lockdown, well, during like COVID or a few years back, that was almost become the norm, didn't it? Whereas obviously now it's
But what they were doing is they were recording their lessons because they had to. But as soon as they didn't have to record the lessons, it was just the Zoom call. Or where it was on Teams, Microsoft Teams. But they didn't think the video was beneficial. And I can say that a lot of the information I have learned over the last 6 years have been from videos online. Like I have learned more from YouTube than I did in my degree about some topics because my degree just can't, like when you're in a classroom with 10, 15, 20, 30 people and you all have questions, the lecturer can't answer all those questions. If you're online, you can go and search up whatever rabbit hole and do what you want. That's an advantage technology has that lectures don't have. And when we look at education, well, maybe technology is actually better than like actual learning environments in some cases. And this is where the well-being of the student as an encompassed competency for the OECD focus. Anyway, when you look at it, it's like, well, yeah, we want a student to have healthy. They want to be healthy, good well-being, good mental health, social health, etc., etc. How you do that is going to be different for every person, and I think tech is involved in that, and it has to be involved in that. But to what extent is going to be measured by what misuse is, but misuse for each person is going to be different. So it's an individualized case. Yeah, John?
Yeah, I think I think that was the bit I was struggling with of like certain platforms are just bad. That's the not in this conversation because I know there was nuance, but often what is spoken about is X platform is bad. TikTok is just bad. Yes, there's a lot of misinformation on TikTok, but it's not bad.
Obviously, I'm doing a video essay on misinformation, so I'm well in the weeds of this right now anyway. I'm well in the weeds, like heavy into academics and all the other stuff. But when it comes to misinformation, what is misinformation? Like when you look at it, what is misinformation? Is it information that's been shared and is incorrect at that time, or incorrect at a time in future, or is it incorrect to the person that's saying it, or incorrect to the person that's perceiving it? Like when you look at the TikTok sharing misinformation, yeah, but what does that even mean? If someone says the Earth is flat, most people would argue that's misinformation, correct? But it's not technically wrong. Like you could say the Earth is flat because parts of the Earth is flat when you measure it. Is the whole Earth flat? No, I don't think so. But parts of the Earth is flat. So you need to then look at the context. And one of the arguments that has gone on in Discord, someone's saying the PISA assessments are bad because there was a triangle with triangles in, and the question is, count the blue and red triangles, what's the percentage? And the person said, well, is the whole triangle a triangle? Because they're thinking outside the box. Is the whole triangle, does that count as one triangle?
Does zoom right in and no,
exactly. So misinformation, you need to look at the question, look at the information that's shared and actually analyze it, which is a skill that should be taught at schools. And you're like, well, TikTok is full of misinformation. Not if you're competent enough to understand the information that's being shared. That's the caveat that I would add to those platforms. Thoughts?
So that it's not the sorry. Can you repeat the last bit? I'm sorry.
I don't think misinformation on platforms is bad if the people perceiving the information is competent at understanding what it means.
Yeah. So it's so it's kind of
yes.
yeah. So I'm just
I
thinking
I would love.
You two do the same thing. You're like, yes, yes, I do agree.
Yeah, no, it's kind of like trying to. I guess that kind of comes back to is that kind of related in a way sort of thing to kind of like anything like in context sort of thing, and also figuring out what the purpose is for going on, say the social, say a given platform. Yeah, I guess it's also with
So
what you're doing, yeah.
going back to
Mhm.
Erin, like that example that we
Yeah.
had with my issue with Erin on this particular video. Yes, there's definitely a place I need to have a little look at, but still, like I'm seeing the YouTube. Wow, I feel old right now. I feel really.
Boomer.
This is on freaking YouTube. Like, and it's interesting the different contexts I'm coming from as a parent. I suddenly shift into different language. I like that. That's funny, and entertaining as well. Like, so when she's on YouTube watching stuff that I don't deem, because that is what it is. I don't deem it as valuable. I am now going, okay, cool. I'm more interested now to go, what does she get from that? Because obviously it's something she wants to do all of the time. And then I'm kind of, as I'm going through this, and I'm making assumptions because she's not obviously here in the room, and I will ask because I'm intrigued. But my guess is that Erin is a very social organism, shall we say?
You
Which
can
she's
call her a person.
no, an organism. Yeah, she is a very social person. And so I'm like, oh, okay, what she's watching is like interaction between multiple, I think like Minecraft players doing families and stuff like that. And I'm like, oh, is she trying to figure stuff out in relation to that? And then I'm like, my interaction isn't shut it off, it's hello, Aaron. It's very much intriguing of like why a curiosity of so what's because now I just want to know and I'm intrigued to know what and yeah.
This could sound sexist, but it's not. It's what the research suggests. Females typically lean towards social interactions and family dynamics. So when you look at what females consume, what females engage with, a lot of the time, it's not like the home thing. That's not what I'm talking about. It's the females like the interaction between individuals, the relationships between individuals more than men, because men have been the fight or flight, all the rest of the other defend the pack, blah blah blah. So it's a different view of it. So when you look at like females when they're younger, they read a lot. They read a lot of fiction specifically, and they also engage in stories like
I
narrative
suppose
narrative
like
stories with people.
I suppose from a modern perspective, the YouTube videos they're all about interacting like families. It's a family unit on Minecraft interacting. So there's the Minecraft, which is the fun and the play, and then there is that family interaction, which is when I'm looking at Aiden does none of that, but is constantly learning in a traditional learning sense. But then I'm there like, but so's Aaron.
So I'm curious because this somewhat mimics the PISA results. The PISA results, obviously, for those unfamiliar, actually, they look at three subjects. It's not subjects, they're competencies: mathematics, reading, and science. Reading literacy, scientific integrity, and mathematics logic, basically. Most of the time, boys are better at maths, logic, numbers than girls. Most of the time, girls are better at the reading because of fiction, relationships, etc. So I'm curious, when it comes to Aiden and the stuff that he's learning, is a lot of it logic, like following logical patterns, engineering, maths, words, patterns, essentially? Because languages is
Yeah,
logic, it's patterns.
it's a lot of patterns. He also just likes to research new things.
Such as? Like,
such
is he
as
looking at the dynamics between a woman and a woman, or
no,
like?
no,
But
it's
that's what,
very much it's facts. It's fact.
Yeah, that's right.
It's cold hard. Like what is this? Like flags of the world.
History. That's what.
History. A lot of history. A lot of history. He dives deep into history. So there's a little bit of like
but that is patterns. Patterns
yeah,
is using
yeah,
history and finding the logic that goes forwards. Oh, they did this, then they did this, then they did that, and we
yeah.
can now do this thing from it. Unlike when you're reading fictional stories, where it's like, oh, this person over here did this magical thing that doesn't really make any sense. This animal that doesn't actually exist over here did this thing that again doesn't really make any sense, and they came together and happily ever after, whatever. Like that's drastically different from
Yeah,
these things happened
but a
in
lot of
history.
more imagination kind of
Yeah,
involved.
and that's what we see when learning in again tendencies, caveat, nuance, insert here. But females lean fictional, they lean reading, they lean interactions between individuals, whereas guys, boys tend to lean more facts, logic, patterns. And obviously, John, you're biased towards the fact, logic, and pattern. This is learning. And that's where I think it is. I think it's your bias towards what you think learning is, towards what they
Mm,
think learning is. So I'd be
yeah.
curious to get your partner's view on what she used to do when she was younger. I imagine she used to read books or do something similar. I don't know. Or maybe just draw artsy stuff, because I know she
More
likes
art
drawing.
stuff, yeah.
Art, definitely.
So you're coming up with your own worlds, your own analogies, your own things. Like, I'll add this on there. Why? It looks cool.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Interesting.
It is. Right, we're closing in on lunchtime, so I'll close out the recording unless there's anything else you want to add.
Oh, there's plenty, but
Okay,
not now.
anything else you want to add now?
No, because that will be not from me anyway.
I think that I think I might be at risk of kind of like repeating certain things, but I think it's definitely quite an insightful sort of thing in terms of like knowing that there aren't well, it's knowing that it's not necessarily just like one given way of like thinking.
There isn't.
No, no, there isn't. Yeah, quite. And it's
Weird.
also I think, and also going back to there's another thing you mentioned about teaching, whether or not because it seems that quite a lot. You mentioned about the kind of, I know this is going back to what we were talking about earlier, but you mentioned about kind of having like having a kid, for instance, try to tell like a 5-year-old kid to stand still on the same spot in a classroom, whether or not that whether because of course there's not I get the impression that quite a lot of uh like with children sort of thing, it's more so. It's not anywhere near. It's more kind of black and white, and there's less kind of like inhibitions, if you will. So kind of if they want to do something, they're like, well, no, I want to do that, and no kind of like thinking, no kind of like thinking of how that might affect that necessarily, of how that would affect the kind of it's kind of black and white. I want to do that thing, and that's like why can't I do that thing? And it's you know where you stand, but at the same time it's like oh okay, and I don't know whether or not teaching kind of takes that into account or not, and if it doesn't, whether it should. Well, I don't, yeah, it's
That's a great question, and I would ask lots of teachers that, and lots
yeah,
of teachers would say, "Well, that's not what I was taught, or that's not how I was taught." I'm like, I don't care how you were taught. You should be looking at the people you're teaching now.
yeah, right, yeah,
So, but yeah, great question. It's one of those things that I discussed about in my undergrad degree quite a bit in coaching. And you've got to coach the individuals that are in front of you, not the child that you used to be.
It's so interesting. Ugh, we're gonna continue now. Darn it. It's so interesting, like as the parent to be a parent, there are so many assumptions that I make as a parent that I have to behave as a parent. Like, meaning I have to not think about any of these things that I think about with all of my coaching clients, with all of the work that I do. And yet, when I sit here, I'm like, why am I not doing what I do here in this context with my
But you said the same about yourself, what, 3 months ago? When I
yeah,
asked you, like, why are you doing X, Y, Z when you believe A, B, C? And you're like, good question.
yeah.
I guess
But Again, that comes back to just following rules. When you go through education, you're taught to follow rules, which
Yeah.
is a big flaw in the education system. And unless you're exposed to any experiences where you can challenge and push out of those areas, ecological psychology, I got that from university up until like undergrad university. I just did as I was told. I was the goody two shoes. I got the grades. I followed the rules. I did all that stuff. Go to university, and it's not that I didn't get the grades. I wanted to learn. I got a 2-1 at uni, but I learned way more than people with the first. Some people with the first are like, oh yeah, I know this stuff because they got a first in the essay. You ask them about the essay. Oh, what was that thing? I don't know. What do you mean you don't know? You wrote a first class essay about it. Yeah, but I just copied it from this person and then cited them and then got a good grade from it because I followed the rules. And you're like,
So well and good, but if it's not, they can't apply that to real world situations. It's it's not what's it really.
what was the point? You spent
Yeah,
9 grand, 9 grand to get a piece of paper and you don't understand anything. What is the point? But yeah. Yeah, I think everyone is an educator, but a lot of people don't embrace what being an educator actually means and the philosophy behind being an educator, which is obviously my own bias towards education because I like education. I spent most of my life in it, around it, and doing it.
Do you
But
find that kind of quite a lot of education isn't as applicable and isn't as relevant to the real world as it should be? And is that something that's
formal
being
education that's directed by curriculum teachers, yes. When it comes to education, broadly speaking, online education is what I would prefer because it's much less constrained because anyone can talk about anything and say whatever they want. And then it's up to the individual to then use the information in that environment to develop their own expertise and learning skills for it, which is why people learn how to code online or do software online, or they learn philosophies, psychology, etc. They can learn it all online because there are less constraints. However, when someone is new and going online, because of the lack of constraints, it can be too complex for them. And that's where they'd need, I would argue, a teacher, a coach, an educator, someone to help guide them. Because like one of the struggles at the moment with misinformation is if you see something from a video of a creator that's got millions of subscribers and they sound really good, it looks
Yeah.
really good, you're like, oh, they must be telling the truth. If there's no sources and there's no affordances, there's no way for the individual to go find out themselves apart from literally just going and researching themselves, then they're just going to believe it's true. Unless they have developed those skills somewhere, I would argue it should be done in formal education in schools to challenge those things. They're just going to believe it, which is why I think educators should be putting sources in videos so it gives people the affordance to go and check, just to double check and be like, is that actually right? But yeah, that's how education I think is going to move forward. It's not necessarily, I don't think it's going to be beneficial to stop people from putting fake stuff or false stuff or misleading stuff online. It's being open, being transparent about the information you're sharing. I think this because this is my logic, this is my thinking, this is my working, these are the sources that I've used. Maybe you agree, maybe you disagree. Let's have a conversation about it. Not this is the answer, this is how this works. Because I don't think that's accurate most of the time.
I think certain misinformation. It's hard to know as to what is classed as misinformation and what isn't. So I think it really depends on
That depends on the context.
Yeah,
And we could talk about this for hours.
Yeah, I think it seems I found out a little while ago. I'm sure you probably know a lot more on this, but well, I
Don't
know.
assume.
But yeah, it seems that I was looking into it a little bit into and that it seemed like that misinformation and kind of like newspapers say back between before the First and Second World War sort of thing, around that sort of time, that there's a lot kind of misinformation kind of going around, and whether or not the kind of this misinformation, whether it's kind of almost like history kind of risking repeating itself, and whether we should really kind of learn from kind of our past really to make sure that that sort of thing doesn't repeat itself, and two, and also not as well as that sort of thing. It seems like that information as well sort of thing is a lot more readily available now with the internet and everything as well. But yeah.
Yep, agreed.
Mm.
Agreed. I mean, it was more propaganda back then because obviously the war and etc., and there's less propaganda now, but it's same situation, just instead of it being in newspapers, it's now online, which means there's more of it.
Yeah. check out what's going on in the likes of like Russia and China sort of thing. It seems to it is unknown as to exactly, seems to be quite difficult to kind of get an unbiased view as to exactly what's kind of going on without there being bias on either side. Yeah.
There's always going to be bias. You can't get rid of bias. Humans are biased.
There's no such thing as non-bias.
See, I think I remember. I think it was around the first. I think it was about when kind of Russia Ukraine first started off. I think I found out not long after that sort of thing that one of the Russian news channels. I didn't really watch it anyway, but one of the Russian news channels on Sky just stopped, and it's like, hold it a second, what's going on here? Sort of thing. Why are they stopping that? What are they trying to stop people from
Even with that situation, the way that we are told about the war is biased. Like, we're not told very often Putin's side of the story.
Yeah.
We're just not told it. So we have biased media. And when you look at Ukraine and what's going on there, Ukraine and Russia, there are bits on both sides that I don't like and bits on both sides that I do like. So, but there's a narrative spun in the news.
Yeah, and you'd hope that with everything that had happened before, that you'd have learned from that sort of thing, that it wouldn't, especially with the communication that we've got available to us, that it wouldn't resort to that in the first, that things, wouldn't have to resort to war in the first place, sort of thing. But
it happens.
I now have to constrain this conversation?
I was going to say we're going to.
We're going to kind of go on another tangent.
Yes,
that's our life.
Yes, that is every Saturday normally. Right, I'm going to stop the recording. So bye everyone.
Bye.